I'm Sarah, 32, and for years my life felt less like my own and more like a public utility. I was the go-to person, the one who always said yes, whether it was for an urgent work task at 9 p.m., a friend's last-minute crisis, or a family member needing emotional support. I barely had to give. My phone was an extension of my hand, constantly buzzing with demands, and I responded to every text, every call, every plea with an immediate, almost frantic availability. Deep down, I was exhausted, a silent ache gnawing at my core. The air in my small apartment, even after I aired it out, always seemed to carry the faint, stale scent of burnt-out ambition and unspoken resentment. The city noise, usually a comforting hum, now felt like a constant barrage, each distant siren a reminder of another emergency I wasn't responding to. It was a subtle, insidious pain, the kind that whispers, "You're not enough unless you're doing something for someone else." I felt like an emotional puppet, my strings pulled by the whims of others, a constant emergency button that everyone knew they could press. My self-worth, I slowly realized, had become inextricably tied to my usefulness, to the perpetual affirmation that came from being needed. I was trapped in a gilded cage of my own making, desperate for validation, yet only finding increasing emptiness. I remember sleepless nights, the glow of my phone screen illuminating the ceiling as I replayed every unsaid word, every unspoken silence, every disguised rejection. It was as if my soul was permanently on its knees, begging for a crumb of attention. My energy drained in pathetic attempts to please, to justify myself, to explain myself, making me predictable. An emotional emergency button people would press and then put back on the shelf. The pain was a constant void, a frustration I couldn't name, a weariness even sleep couldn't fix. I was losing myself, diluted in the incessant search for love that never truly came, because I didn't know how to give that love to myself. You've felt this too, haven't you? That inexplicable emptiness, that gnawing feeling of losing pieces of yourself with every yes you force out? How can anyone escape this trap? Can my own situation even be resolved? The breaking point wasn't a sudden explosion, but a quiet, insidious erosion. It was the sting of an unfair criticism after I'd bent over backward for my boss on a weekend project. I remember the exact moment. Saturday afternoon, the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling my kitchen, a rare moment of peace. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from my supervisor, a terse email about a minor error in a report I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. to finish. No acknowledgement of the extra effort, just a cold correction. The coffee tasted bitter. That dull thud of betrayal from a friend, Alex, who I'd covered for countless times, only to have them dismiss my feelings about a crucial shared responsibility. They just laughed and said, "Oh, Sarah, you're always so dramatic." Or perhaps, most profoundly, the inexplicable emptiness after yet another act of selfless giving, like volunteering for a community garden project that consumed every free evening for a month, left me utterly drained and forgotten. I was physically tired, my muscles ached from bending over plants, but it was the emotional exhaustion that truly crippled me. I felt like a machine, efficiently processing requests, but utterly devoid of inner life. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, while mindlessly scrolling through an online library, a random article popped up in my feed. It had a strange title, "The Sovereign Self, a Jungian Path to Wholeness." It spoke of Carl Jung and individuation, a concept I'd vaguely heard of, but never truly understood. The words were dense, but one sentence in particular hit me like lightning. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. My first thought was, but I'm not irritated with others. My irritation was with myself, for allowing them to use me, for consistently putting their needs before my own. Jung also spoke of persona, describing it as the mask we wear for the world. I suddenly saw my own persona, a worn-out mask of boundless helpfulness, stretched thin and almost transparent. And projection, the idea that what we see in others as flaws might actually be aspects of ourselves we haven't acknowledged. I began to glimpse that the cause of so much pleading, so much desperate seeking of external validation, wasn't external but internal. It was a gaping hole of deficiency within me that I desperately tried to fill with others' affection. This realization ignited a disturbing light. The article explained that constant emotional output drains your psychic energy, making you vulnerable to manipulation. It hit me like a physical blow. My perpetual yes was bleeding me dry. The initial steps were excruciating. Saying no felt like a betrayal, triggering waves of guilt and panic that would wash over me, leaving me breathless. I remember the first time I actually didn't respond to an urgent work email after hours. My stomach was in knots, my palms sweating. The urge to immediately type a response to explain why I couldn't was almost unbearable. But I forced myself to put the phone down, to step away. The silence that followed was deafening, terrifying. Friends seemed confused, some even irritated by my newfound unavailability. Sarah, who always helped with moving, suddenly had a prior engagement. Sarah, who always listened to endless relationship dramas, suddenly needed to take some time for myself. My sister, usually quick to ask for favors, called with an edge in her voice, "Are you okay? You've been different lately." They were accustomed to controlling me through my predictability, my immediate reactions. My withdrawal forced them to confront their own projections, their reliance on my endless supply of attention. There were awkward silences, canceled plans, and even a few pointed remarks. "You're not as much fun anymore," one friend casually remarked, and the sting was real. But something shifted within me with each difficult no. A tiny spark of self-preservation, a flicker of genuine curiosity about what lay beyond the mask of constant availability. It was the whisper of my own voice, suffocated for so long by the external noise. The discomfort of this transition was profound, like shedding an old skin that no longer fit, but was all I'd ever known. The silence, initially terrifying, gradually transformed. It wasn't an empty void, but a space, a sacred solitude where for the first time in years I began to hear my own voice, clear and unburdened by external expectations. It was in these quiet moments that the true work began. I started journaling, not about my day, but about my reactions, my emotions, the subtle shifts in my internal landscape. I focused on those moments of irritation that Jung had spoken of. There was Sarah, a colleague, who always seemed to interrupt me, finishing my sentences. My initial reaction was annoyance, a prickle of anger. But instead of fuming, I'd ask myself, what does her interruption trigger in me? And the answer, stark and uncomfortable, was a deep-seated fear of not being heard, of my voice not mattering. This was my shadow, the unacknowledged parts of myself, often negative or uncomfortable, that I'd been projecting onto others. Sarah wasn't the problem. My own insecurity was. I learned that psychic energy, as Jung described it, isn't an endless resource. It's finite, and every unexamined reaction, every impulsive emotional outburst, every desperate plea for attention drained it. By choosing silence instead of an impulsive reaction, I began to conserve this energy. It felt like plugging a leak in a dam, slowly allowing the reservoir to fill again. For instance, when Alex, my friend who'd dismissed my feelings, texted me later with a casual, "Hey, free to grab dinner?" My old self would have immediately said yes, hoping to mend the rift, to prove my worth. This time, I paused. I felt the old pull, the desire to please, but I also felt a new resolve. I simply replied, "Thanks for the invite, Alex. I'm not available tonight." No explanation, no justification, just a clear boundary. The silence that followed felt heavy, but also incredibly liberating. Choosing silence wasn't passive, it was an active choice, a declaration of sovereignty over myself. There were days, many days, when the urge to revert to my old patterns was overwhelming. Guilt was a constant companion, whispering, "You're being selfish, you're losing friends, you're not being a good person." I'd see groups of friends laughing on social media, plans I hadn't been invited to, and a wave of loneliness would threaten to drown me. But then, I'd remind myself of the emptiness, the exhaustion that had defined my life before. This discomfort, I realized, was a necessary part of growth. It was the resistance of old patterns, the struggle of the caterpillar transforming into a butterfly. It was painful, but it was productive. I started carving out specific times for sacred solitude. This wasn't depressive isolation, but a deliberate choice to be alone with myself, to listen to the whispers of my own soul. I'd sit by my window, watching the rain fall, not reaching for my phone, just being. I'd walk in the park, the rustle of leaves underfoot and the chirping of birds the only sounds, allowing my thoughts to simply drift without judgment. This phase, though uncomfortable, was essential for hearing my own voice, the one that had been suffocated by so much external noise and validation seeking. One key moment stands out. My boss, notorious for last-minute demands, called me on a Friday evening, expecting me to work through the weekend on a non-urgent task. In the past, I would have immediately agreed, sacrificing my plans without a second thought. This time, I took a deep breath. I understand this is important, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. But I have commitments this weekend that I can't reschedule. I can prioritize this first thing Monday morning. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then a hesitant, "All right, Sarah, Monday it is." The consequence? Not a reprimand, not a dismissal, but a quiet, newfound respect. That night, instead of stress-eating microwave dinner while staring at a spreadsheet, I cooked a proper meal, lit candles, and read a book, truly savoring the peace. This was the true power of choosing silence is sovereignty over oneself. It wasn't just about saying no to others, but saying yes to myself. I'm curious, has anything in my story resonated with your own experiences? What's one thing you've learned about setting boundaries or finding your own voice? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're finding this journey of self-discovery helpful, consider subscribing to the channel to join our growing community. Understood. The air around me began to shift, almost imperceptibly at first, like a gentle breeze after a suffocating stillness. As I continued to practice conscious unavailability, I started to reap the rewards, small but significant victories that fueled my journey. More peace settled into my days, a quiet hum replacing the constant frantic energy. I noticed a tangible increase in my physical and mental energy. The dull ache in my shoulders, a constant companion, began to subside. My thoughts, once a tangled mess of other people's problems, felt clearer, more focused. Most importantly, my relationships began to transform, slowly, painfully, but authentically. The superficial connections, built on my constant availability, started to wither, and for a while, that was lonely. But then, new, more authentic connections began to emerge. Conscious unavailability, I discovered, acts as a powerful filter. It became clear who truly valued me versus who only valued what I could do for them. The individuals who thrived on my people-pleasing tendencies, those who saw me as an emotional emergency button, gradually drifted away. Some expressed irritation, others simply faded into the background. It was painful to watch some of these relationships dissolve, but the surprise was seeing who truly stayed. My friend Maya, for instance, who I'd always worried I was not doing enough for, actually expressed admiration. "Sarah," she said, "you seem so much more grounded lately." I really respect that you're taking time for yourself." Her words were a balm, validating my difficult choices. As I began to value my own time and energy, external validation lost its suffocating power. The need for others' approval, once an insatiable hunger, diminished with each act of self-sovereignty. I stopped checking my phone compulsively, no longer desperate for likes or affirmations. The quiet voice of my own inner wisdom grew louder, more confident. My internal validation, born from honoring my own needs and boundaries, swelled into a profound sense of self-respect. It was a revelation, the love I had so desperately begged for, the acceptance I craved from others, could only truly be born from me, for me. I remember a specific instance at work. My colleague, Mark, a well-meaning but often demanding person, approached me with a seemingly urgent task just as I was about to leave for a long-planned weekend getaway. In the past, I would have canceled my plans, feeling guilty about letting him down. This time, I calmly listened, assessed the actual urgency, or lack thereof, and politely but firmly stated, "Mark, I understand this is important, but I've already made arrangements for the weekend. I can look at this first thing Monday morning." The slight shift in his demeanor was palpable, a flicker of surprise, then a grudging acceptance. The weekend was glorious, free from the usual underlying anxiety of unfinished tasks or imagined disapproval. This wasn't about being unhelpful. It was about honoring my commitments to myself. The subtle shifts in my daily life became more pronounced. I started saying no to social invitations that didn't genuinely excite me, opting instead for quiet evenings at home or meaningful interactions with a select few. The fear of missing out, FOMO, that once plagued me, began to dissipate, replaced by a deep sense of contentment in my own company. I realized that my energy was no longer being scattered in 1,000 directions, but concentrated, allowing me to engage more deeply with the things and people that truly mattered. My conversations became more genuine, less about performing, and more about connecting. The quiet power of conscious unavailability was transforming my life, one boundary at a time. It was a journey of becoming, not just doing. The crucial turning point arrived not with a bang, but with a profound, almost spiritual calm. It was a sunny afternoon, and I was sitting in my favorite park, the gentle murmur of distant conversations and the rustle of leaves in the trees creating a natural symphony. I wasn't meditating or actively trying to achieve anything. I was simply present. And in that stillness, an overwhelming insight washed over me. It was like a dam breaking, but instead of chaos, there was pure, crystalline clarity. I wasn't just setting boundaries. I was the boundary. My self-worth wasn't external. It was an inherent, unshakable truth, a core of being that had always been there, just buried under layers of people-pleasing and external demands. In that moment, I felt finally free from external control, fully connected to my essence. It was a sense of being home within myself, a feeling of deep belonging that transcended any need for external validation. The profound peace was unlike anything I had ever experienced, not the temporary lull after a crisis, but a foundational stillness. I realized that the person who begged for love had dissolved, leaving behind someone who, in silence, had found wholeness. This liberation was an intense joy, a silent, powerful roar of self-acceptance. I had been planning to attend a family gathering, an annual event that was always fraught with passive-aggressive comments and unspoken expectations. My stomach would churn for days leading up to it. In the past, I would have gone out of obligation, feeling drained and resentful afterward. But as I sat in the park, the thought of that gathering no longer filled me with dread, but with a clear, calm conviction. I wasn't going. Not out of anger or defiance, but simply because it no longer aligned with my peace. My peace was non-negotiable. It was a courageous decision to cut a toxic tie, not with anger, but with quiet, profound self-respect. There was no need for grand pronouncements, just a simple, firm no. This moment wasn't about being alone in a negative sense. It was about being alone among the strong, strong in my authenticity, strong in my self-possession. The path to individuation is often a solitary one, because it requires shedding the expectations of the collective. But it leads to a deeper, more profound connection with yourself, and paradoxically, to more authentic connections with those who truly see and value you for who you are, not for what you can give. The silence had not isolated me. It had purified my world. I breathed in the scent of damp earth and blooming flowers, a tangible embodiment of my newfound clarity. The weight that had pressed down on me for years, the invisible chains of obligation and unworthiness, had simply evaporated. I was light. I was free. I was me. My journey has been one of sacrifices and immense gains. I lost some relationships, yes, but I gained myself. I exchanged superficial connections for authentic ones, and a life of constant emotional depletion for a wellspring of inner peace. I learned that true freedom doesn't come from external circumstances or from winning others' approval. It comes from within, from the courage to embrace your authentic self, even if it means being misunderstood or rejected. Conscious solitude isn't a punishment. It's a sacred space, a path to wholeness. If you feel this pain, if my story resonated with you, know that there is a way out of the trap of excessive availability. It starts with a whisper, a tiny spark of self-preservation. It demands courage, especially in the face of discomfort and the reactions of those who benefited from your old patterns. Are you ready to be misunderstood and rejected, or even hated in the name of your inner freedom? Are you willing to pay the price of being you? The journey is challenging, but the reward is immeasurable. The profound peace that comes from truly knowing and honoring yourself. I chose my peace. And in choosing it, I found a love more profound and sustaining than any I had ever begged for. It was my own. If this story has touched you, if it sparked a flicker of recognition or a desire for your own peace, please consider subscribing to our channel. Join a community of individuals on similar paths of self-discovery and empowerment. We share stories, insights, and support, because while the journey of individuation is personal, we don't have to walk it completely alone. And I'd love to hear from you. What's your story? What have you learned about finding your own peace, even in the midst of external demands? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Your story might be the catalyst someone else needs. Did this video resonate with you? What insights did you gain? Let us know.